Good morning again, or good day again, or good afternoon. I think we're just going to start. I see that there are still some people missing according to the list of people who signed up, but I suppose since we only have 2 hours, we should get going and people can drop in as they come online. I'm really glad to see those of you who are here, even though I don't see you. I see a few familiar names, at least. So welcome to all of you for this workshop. I must admit, frankly, that I struggled a bit with how to put up a workshop on manuscripts in a fully online format. Since we are not sitting together, we cannot in any way sort of connect with each other or with the manuscripts that we are working with. So I hope we can anyway learn a bit from this session, and I really look forward also to your input and interpretation. The topic today is the Islamic manuscript tradition of East Africa, which some of you may be very familiar with, and others come from other backgrounds. Let me try to share my screen a little. This one. No. Sorry. Is this what I figured? Or we might as well actually look at this one. Let's see. Here. This is the one we can look at. Alrighty. So I think hope you all can see the screen. Can somebody give me a heads up that the screen is actually on?
Yes, the screen is visible.
Thank you so much. In the handout that I gave you ahead of the workshop, I basically raised 4 different questions. And for those of you who attended the talk I had on Sunday, you might have noticed that I'm quite hung up on the manuscript to print transition. And that is for the specific reason that is more or less exactly the equivalent period of the known manuscript corpus in East Africa, with some outliers, as I mentioned. But if we look at the period approximately, let's say 1860, 70 up to 1940, 50, this is the period when we see a lot of titles circulating in both formats. So I'm really interested in it myself, and there is quite, as I also mentioned in the talk, there is quite a rich corpus of 20th century manuscripts that are interesting to look at. We saw something similar in the presentation in the panel yesterday by the 2 professors who did the EAP project in Senegal and Mali, where they also showed how poetry and recitals were repeated in manuscript form well into the 1970s. So I basically, that was basically the first question I wanted us to think about a bit in this workshop. and I showed you one specific example, which is a manuscript of prayer known as the Dua Asaba, which deals with the invocation of the jinn. Second question is more on the manuscript as sources of social and intellectual history, and this is because I am an historian, as I said on Sunday. I tend to address these manuscripts with the questions of a historian. What can it tell us about society, about human agency, about developments both in terms of literacy, maybe book production, but also religious and intellectual development. Then I raised also a third question, and well, for the first two questions, I have actually tried to offer some interpretations myself, and other historians have done so too. So I put the titles there in a reading list, but for the two last questions, this is beyond my expertise, and also there hasn't been that much done on the textual and visual styles in East Africa, with some few exceptions, notably Zulfikar Hirji, who wrote about 3 Qurans, and some individual studies. So I hope we also can have time to discuss that, and really look forward to your input as well. And the last but not least has more to do with both language development, Arabic as a taught or instructed language, the interchanges between Arabic and Swahili or Ajami, linguistic shifts, and also the incorporation of textual elements like allusions. That this could presumably also go in a two-way direction. And again, I have to emphasize that this is way beyond my own expertise, and all the more reason to hear also your input. I was thinking I should go through just the material that I made available. Let me share screen again. There we go. Sorry, I figured that this would take some time. Let's see. Do you see now the page of the Endangered Archives program? So I was sharing with you 2 digital collections that are now online. The one is the EAP 1114, which you can find on the Endangered Archives website, and the other one is the EAP 466, which is on the same website. The EAP 466 concerns the Riada Mosque collection in Lamu, whereas the EAP 1114 concerns the so-called Malamidris collection in Zanzibar. I also mentioned on Sunday that they are extremely different. The Riada one is mainly manuscript. It is very much the result of a taught curriculum in one mosque in one location from about 1900 or 1890s and onwards. Whereas the Malamidris collection is the collection of one person who collected it over a lifetime, and it contains both manuscript and print. If you're looking for the manuscripts and the Malamidris collection, they come towards the end of the collection. So from about item 100 and onwards, for those who are interested. The last ones have been placed in a Dropbox, which are also made available to you, I hope. And do you see now a copy of the Quran from Zanzibar National Archives? No, you don't. I will stop this one and go to this one. These copies are also made available to you, so you can have a look at them during the workshop. There is one item which is this copy of a Quran, which is now held by the Zanzibar National Archives. And then there is also the full copy of the Dua Sabasib As-Saba. Both of them should be in your Dropbox. And these are the materials that we will work with in this workshop. I will stop share. And let me see. I apologize for the slowness of everything here, but what I didn't really make up my mind if we should work on one question at a time, or if we should go to breakout rooms and work at all 4 questions and then come back. But since we are, I think, somewhat less participants than I anticipated, I think we might have the possibility to do this question by question, and simply start with the first one that is in your handout, concerning the manuscript to print collection. And let me share screen again. And then the items that I singled out from the online collections are these 3. But of course, you are not bound by these exact 3. You can look through the whole collection and all the collections if you like, and if we get the time. But I just singled out these as examples. This is one copy from EAP 466 that has this sort of feature of being print-like and having a table of contents at the end, for example. And then this one sample of a travelogue written in Zanzibar in the late 1890s that exists in a manuscript, contemporary manuscript form, meaning this copy is made shortly after it was first authored, and then printed in the 1930s. So we notice there is a certain lag. There's a lag of 30 years between the authoring of the text and its print. In other cases, we see similar and corresponding texts going more or less directly to print, which indicate, of course, that access to print, in this case, Halabi workshop, Halabi publishers in Egypt, but it could also be others. So I just raised the question quite simply: when do you think the manuscript to print transition period is? Can we make any distinction at the back end, so to speak, and not least at the modern end? And if so, why? These are some questions that I have discussed with relation to the East African material, and others have, of course, discussed much more extensively with reference to, let's say, Egypt, but also West Africa, whom I see there are some experts here. So I wonder if we should just do this in a way that we go to the breakout rooms. We have 4 questions. So if we spend about between 15 and 20 minutes in the breakout rooms, and then come back and just go over the material, and then go to the second question, breakout rooms, third question, breakout rooms, and fourth, and then come back. We should be able to get through it, and then we also get some time together in between and don't spend all our time in breakout rooms. Would that sound okay? Any wild objections? Then I think I will ask the organizers to set up breakout rooms, and we can get started. I'm looking forward to meet you there. Perhaps we should move to question number 3, because that is where I think the combined expertise of this gathering is the best. Let me find the PowerPoint again. Yeah. This is the question that I have been puzzling over myself. For those of you who work in West Africa and in Egypt, there is always the query over both the textual style, but also visual styles, how they, if we can even speak about such a thing. The reason I'm showing this particular manuscript, it's simply because I think it's really nice. and when I say that, it shows my ignorance in many ways of, for example, the production of color, of ink, but it also shows very much the shortcomings of the digital format, that we are really not, this isn't really very helpful. But I wonder if some of you have had a look at some of the collections and found this to be in any way something that we could start thinking about a particular East African style, or if it's very much bound up with the Hadrami Yemeni style, which is where much of the tradition comes from. I can share, or maybe I can rather ask you to take a look also at the sample of the Quran from the Zanzibar National Archives. Did this leave you with any thoughts on the style and presentation, both of the script and of the illuminations? Please, I leave the floor open for anyone. You are welcome to speak in any language, English, Arabic, or French.
Catherine, كاترين السلام عليكم. أنا اسمي الدكتور أحمد عظيم.
أهلا يا دكتور أحمد.
الله يبارك. بس هو هذه القضية التي تحدثين عنها وهذا الموضوع اللي حضرتك تحدثتي عنه هو مرتبط بعدة أمور. أولا المخطوط اللي موجود قدامنا احنا يعني حضرتك مش عارفين المصدر بتاعه بالضبط في أين، ولكن هو يعني لكي نحدد هذه الأمور لابد إن احنا ننظر لعدة أشياء. الشيء الأول مرتبط بدراسة ما يسمى بعلم المخطوط العربي أو كوديكولوجيا المخطوط العربي. شوف النوع الحبر الذي كتب به هذا المخطوط، ثم الزخارف الموجودة على هذا المخطوط في أي عصر كانت موجودة هذه الزخارف، ثم بعد ذلك نوع الورق، لأن هذا الأمر يحدد لنا أحيانا بعض المواطن التي أنتج فيها المخطوط، وبعض الزخارف تحدد لنا العصر الذي أنتج فيه المخطوط. خط نسخي حديث، هذا الخط الذي أمامنا الآن على اللوحة هذا خط نسخي حديث، لا يمكن من خلاله أن نحدد موطن المخطوط أو مكان المخطوط، وإنما يمكن الاعتماد على نوع الورق هذا الذي كتب، اللي هو يعد أحد حوامل النص. نوع الورق هذا من الممكن أن نحدد من خلاله يعني بيئة المخطوط أو زمن المخطوط. ثم الزخارف الموجودة، يعني أنا الصورة ليست واضحة أمامي الآن كاملة، من الممكن أن توضحيها أكثر. الزخارف الموجودة من الممكن الاعتماد عليها في تحديد زمن المخطوط وبيئة المخطوط، وأنت تعلمين يعني هذا الأمر مهم جدا، لأن الزخارف كانت مرتبطة بفترات زمنية معينة في بيئات زمنية معينة. هذا المخطوط حقيقة اللي موجود اللي حضرتك قلتي ربما يكون من المجموعة اليمنية، الخط لا يمكن الاعتماد عليه في ان احنا نحدد اذا كان من المجموعة اليمنية او ليس من المجموعة اليمنية. المجموعة اليمنية حقيقة يحددها بعض الخطوط المغربية الموجودة في جامع صنعاء المكتوبة على الرقوق، استطيع من خلالها ان انا احدد هذا المخطوط ينتمي الى تلك البيئة او لا ينتمي. الزخارف الموجودة نحتاج إلى دراسة هذه الزخارف لنتأكد إلى أي زمن تنتمي. إذن عندنا محددات رئيسية يمكن الاعتماد عليها حتى يعني نضع الأمور في سياقها. هذه المحددات ترتبط الخط الذي كتب به المخطوط، ثم بنوع الورق كأحد حوامل النص، ثم الزخارف نوع الزخرفة التي انتشرت على المخطوط، ثم بعد ذلك الأمر الثالث، وهذا أمر مهم جدا وهو يرتبط بالجانب المخطوط ككيان مادي موجود في يديه، كراسات كادية التكريس، لأن بعض البيئات خاصة البيئات المغربية كانت تستخدم الكراس الثنائي أو الكراس الثلاثي، وهنا يعني لا أستطيع أن نحدد بسبب وجود النسخة الإلكترونية التي بين أيدينا. دي كانت يعني بعض المحددات الأساسية اللي أنا ممكن من خلالها نقدر نحدد إلى أي زمن أو إلى أي بيئة يمكن نسبة هذا المخطوط. شكرا.
شكرا يا دكتور Ahmed. I wonder if everybody could follow. Is that possible to have? Did everybody have interpretation? No, you did not. I had it myself, but not all the time. So I'm sorry if I'm now skipping over some of your points, but yeah, maybe just a brief summary. Yes. Yeah. No, I think that's absolutely right. It is very difficult to pinpoint to say this is this is clearly copied in East Africa by an East African hand or something. And I think also if we started looking at pigments or color pigments, we might come a bit further. I wonder if anybody else have an opinion on this material. Anyone? You are most welcome. You can have a look at, if you go to the EAP website, you will see more pages than the ones I showed you directly.
هل يمكن عرض المخطوطة مرة أخرى؟ يعني هي غير واضحة الآن. هل يمكن عرض المخطوطة؟
Okay. Yeah. I will share it. Yeah. Do you see it now in full screen? Is it now on your screen as well?
نعم نعم هي واضحة.
نعم. This is just one example, and it's one chosen very randomly by me, simply on the fact that I think it looks nice. for no other reason than that. It has a striking visual front, and you can see also the usage of different color pigmentations. I have no further information about it whatsoever. It has not been subjected to any analysis, neither on the writing style, nor on pigments or ink or paper or binding or anything.
كاترين، هي الحقيقة الموضوع ليس يعني اختيار مخطوط شكله جميل أو له يعني عدة ألوان أو إلى غير ذلك من هذا الأمر. هذا الأمر يعني يرتبط بدراسات كما تعلمين أنت، يعني يرتبط بدراسات كوديكولوجية مهمة جدا. هذه اللوحة التي بين أيدينا قلت لك أنها كتبت بخط نسخي حديث، ربما تعود إلى القرن العاشر أو ما بعد العاشر الهجري، بحسب هذا الخط الموجود أمامنا. هذا خط نسخي حديث. يعني هنا لو أردنا أن نحدد زمن المخطوطة اعتمادا على الخط، أنا أقول لك أن هذه المخطوطة ربما تعود إلى ما بعد القرن العاشر الهجري اعتمادا على هذا الخط الموجود. ثم الزخرفة الموجودة في الصفحة التي على اليسار هذا كتاب فيه ما فيه، كما هو من لم يعرف ما فيه بال الكلب فيه. هذه زيادة حديثة حقيقة، يعني هي ليست من العنوان. وهذه الزخرفة الموجودة لا تعبر إطلاقا عن أي نمط من أنماط الزخارف الموجودة في الحضارة العربية الإسلامية. هذه زخرفة صنعها الناسخ، وهذه نسخة رديئة. أنا أقول لك هذه النسخة حقيقة نسخة رديئة، لأن هذه الزخارف لا تعبر عن نمط أي نوع من أنواع الزخرفة الموجودة في الحضارة العربية الإسلامية، وإنما هو صنعها أحد المزخرفين أو أحد النساخ. هذه ليست زخرفة مزخرف على الأكثر كمان، يعني هذه ربما صنعها أحد النساخ. فهي نسخة حديثة لا يمكن الاعتماد عليها في تقرير قضايا مثل نسبة زمن المخطوط إلى فترة معينة أو إلى بيئة معينة اعتمادا على الزخارف أو اعتمادا على نوع الخط. هو فقط من الممكن أن نقول هذه نسخة حديثة. نسخة حديثة إذا أردت أن أحقق أو مثلا أدرس هذا الكتاب، أقول هذه نسخة حديثة. حتى الورق الذي لا أستطيع أن أحدد نوع الورق، هو فيه بعض الخروم أو الخرم الموجود، وفي بعض الآثار الأرضة الموجودة، لكن لا أستطيع أن أحدد كراسات من المخطوط الموجودة على أي زمن من أو على نمط من أنماط التكريس يمكن أن تنتمي هذه النسخة. بعض النقاط اللي هي الخروم هذه أو بعض آثار الرطوبة هذه لا أستطيع إذا كانت نقاط أو إذا كانت آثار حبر أو إذا كانت يعني عوامل أرضة إلى غير ذلك، لا أستطيع أن أحدد من خلال هذه النسخة. ولكن على كل الأحوال هذه هي نسخة كتبت حديثا وتعرضت لعدم بسبب عدم الحفظ لبعض آثار الرطوبة أو آثار الجو. هذا ما يمكن أن نحدده في هذه النسخة. شكرا.
Thank you very much for this analysis. I appreciate the fact. I mean, definitely it's modern. There is no doubt about it. It is probably late 19th century or even early 20th. Is my guess. I like the comment that this was done by the scribe and not by a separately hired artist. I think that also characterizes many of the manuscripts in the East African collections, with the exception of Quranic copies, which would have a much higher quality, clearly done by a separate artist. We might have a look if I can get it. Let's see, the EMG. EMG and 346. Let me see. This one. Can you now see the set A/12? Is that what you see now?
Yes, it's visible.
You see the front of the copy, Quranic copy?
I've just seen the cover, and you've moved on to what appears to be an illuminated, decorated page.
Exactly, yes. Yes, this is a copy from the Zanzibar National Archives, and it shows a whole other level, of course, of artistic craft, which is where you clearly have artists at work. It's also older than the one in the Riyadh. Its origin is also not quite clear in this case, but this one is not unlikely to be imported to East Africa. But if anybody has any input on this particular copy, I would also much appreciate it. And if you want me to work through the pages, I'll be happy to do so too. Just let me know. This would be the way. These are just sample photos for it. The photos were taken for an exhibition, not for the purposes of digitizing. They were simply taken as samples for an exhibition which focused on Quranic copies overall, like this one.
In this particular image, sorry, I'm an English speaker. In this particular image, I can really see the glistening of this burnished paper that I did see in some of the manuscripts in Timbuktu. So, and what's intriguing to me is that the archive has, or the custodial institution has clearly interleaved this volume with tissues to either preserve the gilt and also there seems to be some sort of issue with the ink offsetting or something like that, which could potentially give clues to the composition of the ink.
Mm.
In terms of the lack of dating, is a point of departure potentially when the manuscript was acquired by the institution?
Yes, this is the issue with many of the copies that are in the Zanzibar National Archives. They were originally collected by the Peace Memorial Museum under colonial auspices, even back to the 1920s and 30s. And in some cases, the transmission or the acquisition papers have not followed.
Ah, yes, not an uncommon problem.
No, that's exactly
yes.
quite a common problem. So
yes.
in this case, I'm not actually 100% sure. I don't have the hand list in front of me.
No, don't worry. It's just that as an option for these collection sort of where to start, at least to create a baseline of, well, we know we had it from the 1920s, etc., etc. It at least gives some sort of benchmark.
Yes. Yeah.
To proceed from.
No,
the absence of anything else.
Any input on the script itself?
I'm afraid there I'm not an expert at all.
Okay. Anybody who feel called upon? I'm also not an expert. I really wouldn't be able to say very much except for Nasr in general. Anyone in the room?
هل فقط يعني أريد أن يعني الصفحة يعني تكون بالشكل الشكل الطولي؟ لا يعني هذه مقلوبة.
Oh, okay. Yes, in that case, I would have to go to each one individually. But the one you see now is not upside down, is it? Or now?
Yes.
Now you see it the right way, I
يعني
think.
نريد لوحة ليس فيها زخارف حتى نتحدث عن الخط. ممكن هذه. Yes.
Maybe this one is a good one.
Yes. بس تمام.
Meanwhile, I'll go and get the hand list so I can tell you as much as I know about it. One moment. Excuse me for 1 second. I'm just going to shift the image briefly. Set an A1, 2. Okay.
كاترين، ممكن أن أعلق على الخط الموجود. على الخط، حضرتك سألتي على الخط.
Yes, please.
بس هو الخط الذي كتبت به هذه بعد التأمل يعني حقيقة هي هذه النسخة هي طبعا هو خط نسخي معروف يعني، ولكن فيه يعني تأثر بالخط بعدة خطوط أخرى، بالخط المغربي. الخط المغربي اللي هو المغربي المبسوط حقيقة يعني. لو نظرنا لكلمة فجعلناها نكالا، شوف الكاف، هذه الكاف كاف مغربية مبسوطة وليست كاف مغربية كوفية، تمام. هذه الكاف، هذا التأثر ما بين خط النسخ وخط المغربي هذا ربما ظهر يعني في فترة متأخرة من عمر خط النسخ شوي. ثم هناك إشارة مهمة جدا، قال إنه الهاء في إنه هذه هاء رقعة، هاء خط الرقعة. وخط الرقعة خط حديث، خط يعني خط نشأ مع الدولة العثمانية، وخط حديث ربما يعود لبداية القرن التاسع الهجري بالضبط، يعني سنة 915 هجرية بدأ استعمال خط الرقعة في الدولة العثمانية. هذه الهاء هاء رقعة، تمام. ثم هذه الراء داخلة ما بين ثم في كلمة ولا لا فارض ولا بكر، هذه الراء هذه راء داخلة بين خط الثلث والخط إلى حد ما شوية واخد خط الديوان شوية. فهناك يعني اختلاط في هذا الخط، هو خط نسخي، ولكن اختلط بخط الرقعة في بعض حروفه، واختلط بالخط الكوفي المبسوط في بعض حروفه. لذلك هذه المخطوطة تعود ربما إلى القرن العاشر الهجري أو ما بعد القرن العاشر الهجري، لأن خط النسخ في بداياته لم يكن يكتب بهذا الأمر. هذا خليط بين عدة خطوط مع خط النسخ. خط النسخ مثل الأساس، ثم دخل معه خط الكوفي المبسوط، ثم دخلت معه خط الثلث، ثم دخل معه خط الرقعة. فلذلك اعتمادا على هذه المؤشرات من الممكن أن نقول أن هذه النسخة الخطية تعود إلى ما بعد القرن العاشر الهجري. شكرا.
Thank you so much again, Dr. Ahmed. I also, in terms of well, we don't have the custodial history, but it would fit well with the rise of Zanzibar as a location that could afford to or acquire these types of highly illuminated and valuable manuscripts. I wonder if anyone have any input also actually on the illumination here, the style. It is also something that I know very little about, and of which there is no particular record in the hand list. Is there anybody who feel called upon for this? I think Mary mentioned the use of guild, but anything particular about the actual ornamentation? Anyone? Meanwhile, I'm trying to find the reference from the hand list, but it is not particularly informative in this case. Any other comments? No? And I will, for the time being, stop share this one and draw your attention to another little manuscript, which is, to me, an intriguing one, and I know some of you may have heard me speaking about it before, but this is a manuscript from approximately the 1930s. And the inference is because it here says Zanzibar Protectorate Education Department, which was only founded in the late 90s, or only came to have that name in the late 1920s. hence the dating of this manuscript to the 1930s. But I'm not really sure. If we go to the next page here. I'm sorry, the image is not very big, but again, I'm wondering, my interpretation of this is that it is a very sort of school teacher handwriting, if you like. I'm not sure if it shows up on this particular page, but there are also sometimes orthographic errors that have been corrected and so on, which led me to the interpretation that it was written either for usage, it is a set of spells and incantations, or it was simply written down for memorizing, or the third option is, of course, that it was written, that it was curated, that it was written down for some purposes of more heritage purposes, or to have a recording of the particular spell or incantation. I think maybe this one page alone is not enough to draw any conclusion, but I would again be interested to hear your input.
ممكن أن تكون
Go ahead, please.
هل ممكن أتحدث؟
Yes, please.
أعتقد هي مش تعليمية بقدر ما هي ممكن تكون أحد الأوراد، يعني شيء يعني فيها أدعية. ربما كان البعض من المسلمين يكتبون مجموعة من الأدعية يقولونها كل يوم مثلا، وربما تمثل كل جزء منها ورد يومي، يعني يقرأه في اليوم مثلا على مدار اليوم والساعة، خاصة أنها انتهت ثم بدأ بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبدأ أدعية أخرى. فأميل أنها تكون مجموعة من الأوراد التي كتبها أحد المشايخ لنفسه مثلا يقرأها كل يوم، وهذا كان منتشرا كثيرا في كثير من البلدان. يعني أحد الأساتذة أو المشايخ يكتب أورادا يقرأها كل يوم في اليوم والليلة. أتصور بحسب ما هو مكتوب أنها كذلك، يعني ليست بغرض التعليم، يعني ليست تعليمية، لأن لا يوجد فيها توجيه ولا شرح. الكتب التعليمية تكون مختصرة ولكن بها شروح لأشياء أخرى أو فيها شيء من التوجيه. هذه مجرد أدعية تنتهي الدعاء ويبدأ دعاء آخر. فأميل أنه كتاب لأوراد دينية صوفية ربما تقرأ في أيام معينة. وهو طبعا حديث جدا، يعني بحسب نوع الخط وبحسب التشكيل الموجود في الكلمات وطريقة الحروف والليونة الموجودة في كثير من الحروف. هو حديث، يعني هو بالتأكيد أعتقد بعد القرن ال11 على الأقل تقدير، أو ال12 الهجري، يعني في ال19 تقريبا ربما الميلادي، ليس قبل ذلك أعتقد.
Well, it is in fact, it is 20th century actually.
I'm sorry، يعني لم أخذ بالي من التاريخ، لكن هذه من نظرة المخطوط نفسه. شكرا.
Yes, no, thank you so much for that interpretation of it. The reason I'm showing it is that yes.
الصورة الموجودة أمامنا الآن بعد إذن حضرتك، الصفحة التي على اليمين، على يمين الناظر، تشتمل على أدعية، على أوراد ذكر فيها أسماء جن، وهذا معهود عند بعض الناس في شمال إفريقيا، في الدول العربية نوعا ما، وفي بعض الدول الأخرى نجدها. هذه أسماء جن يعني يلجأ إليهم، وأوراد يلجأ لهؤلاء الجن أو ملوك الجن أو أمراء الجن لطلب الحاجات. يعني هي شبيهة بأعمال سحرية نوعا ما، يعني توصف في بعض الأحيان أنها خاصة ببعض المتصوفة، طبعا ليس كل المتصوفة، لكنها أعمال جن وفي الأساس يعني واضح من الأدعية التي موجودة في الصفحة التي على اليمين. أما التي على اليسار فهي أذكار، ليس فيها إلا أذكار ثناء على الله عز وجل وتقدمة للدعاء بالثناء على الله سبحانه وتعالى، ثم الدعاء بأسماء الجن. وهذه الطريقة كانت ولا زالت يعني معهودة في بعض الأماكن للتعمية على طريقة السحر والاستعانة بالجن، يعني بحيث يبدأون بذكر الله سبحانه وتعالى وثناء على الله سبحانه وتعالى بما لا يخالف العقيدة الإسلامية، ثم يشرعون بعد هذه المقدمة التي تنطلي على الجميع ولا يشك فيها أحد في ذكر أسماء ملوك الجن وأمرائهم الذين يستعينون به. وأحيانا كانت توضع في شكل حجاب مطوي يوضع على صدور الأطفال وعلى صدور أصحاب الحاجات، سواء كانت فتاة تطلب الزواج مثلا أو شاب يطلب أمر معين. فكان من يقوم بهذا العمل أو هذا السحر يذكر هذه الأسماء بعد هذه الأذكار، فإذا عاب عليه أحد أنه يستخدم السحر أو يلجأ إلى السحر رد عليهم بأنه استعان بالله وذكر الله عز وجل وأثنى على الله وحده في المقدمة، وبالتالي يحاول أن يتبرأ من صفة العمل بالسحر. فهذه طريقة ماكرة يعني ومعهودة معروفة يعني.
Thank you very much for that input. I very much agree. I mean, I published an article about this particular item exactly for the reason that I found this very careful noting down of the whole Dua as-Saba Sibal Saba, which is a long dua, which is exactly to call upon the jinn for particular purposes or for protective purposes. And I found it so interesting to see it written out so carefully and in such detail on such both modern but also sort of low-key piece of paper, which is the notebook of the education department. And that's what raised really my question, why exactly was it written? Of course, we cannot know, but we can speculate that maybe the person wrote it for the purposes of recitation, that it was actually used, or maybe the person wrote it more to keep it, to make sure, to enshrine it in text, if you like, in a period where modernity was certainly also growing in Zanzibar itself, and where these kinds of incantations were coming increasingly under criticism. I know it's impossible to draw conclusions from the writing itself, but even so, I'm interested in the sort of careful noting of this in a notebook like this. I wonder if any of you have any input regarding the style here.
يعني لو تكرمت كاترين، هي الفكرة مش عن اسلوب الكتابة، عن إشارة مهمة جدا في هذه الورقة. يعني حتى لو لم نعرف تاريخ هذه المخطوطة، من الممكن الاعتماد عليها في نحن نحدد التاريخ، في تحديد التاريخ بتاعها. هذا التكريس أو ضم أوراق المخطوطة مع بعضها البعض. شوفي يعني انظري إلى الماوس، هذا الماوس الذي يعني أحركه هنا. لو كانت هذه المخطوطة يعني يعود تاريخها إلى قبل القرن العشرين كانت نظام ضم الأوراق مع بعضها هنا في هذا الأمر. هذا يعني هذه أوراق فردية حديثة، يعني هذا أمر حديث. لكن نظام التكريس الثلاثي والرباعي والخماسي اللي حتى يعني تقولين منها من زنجبار كان نظام التكريس الرباعي والخماسي كان موجود في تلك الفترات. فكانت لو كانت هذه المخطوطة تعود إلى قرون قبل ذلك متقدمة، كان نظام التكريس هنا عند الموس هنا، ثم في الأسفل هنا. أما وجود نظام هذا صنع الكراس الفردي هذا حديث يعني لا يمكن إلا أن نقول أنه نظام حديث جدا كمان يعني. والحمد لله التاريخ هنا 1930 حدد هذا الأمر يعني. شكرا.
Which raises more question regarding its usage, I think. One interpretation is, of course, that this is written down by a practitioner who are leading exactly these types of rituals or dua circles or jinn incantations. This is, I think, the most likely and the most obvious answer, but it isn't the only one. Maybe we move on to a last one before our time is up. Let me stop the screen share and go back to the PowerPoint. These are the Quranic copies that Zulfikar Hirji has published, that are Qurans from Siu in Pate in Lamu, where we are again back to the question about style, both the writing styles, the uses of the knotted tamarbutas, and the particular use of colors and illumination. I'm sorry about the photograph here, but I refer you also to the article itself if you want to look more closely at it. These are both produced in East Africa, but have ended up in various locations due to sale. Again, I find it interesting. Can you see my cursor, the one I'm pointing? Zulfikar Hirji draws attention to these these knotted tamarbutas here, and yeah, great, thank you. And again discusses this with reference to the development of a particular East African scribal style. I have no idea. I am in no position to say this is East African scribal style or not, but maybe some of those of you present here today have an input and can refer it to other styles, whether North African, West African, or of course Yemeni, which would again be the most likely link. All input is good input. The floor is open. Anyone here who have an opinion, an observation, as a comment? It is certainly very different from the Quran we saw in from the Zanzibar National Archives.
يعني هذه ليست قرآن، يعني إشارة هذه ليست قرآن. يعني هذه ما هو موجود مكتوب في هذه النسخة ليس قرآن، وإنما نوع من الأدعية. نوع من الأدعية والأوراد ليست قرآن يعني. تمام؟ هذه يعني إشارة فقط يعني.
Yes, it is the one on the right is a supplication section that is given alongside the Quran. And what would you say about the writing style of that supplication section then? Anyone? Just silence.
هو مجرد دعاء، هذا مجرد دعاء، لكن لا ندري هل هو متكرر. أنا أرى على اليسار سورة، يعني أظن سورة ياسين. تمام. هل هذا الدعاء الموجود متكرر في كل سورة من السور القرآنية الموجودة في هذا المصحف اللي أنت وقفت عليه كاترين؟ هذه واحدة. الأمر الثاني، اللوحة يعني حقيقة لا نستطيع من خلالها نحن نحدد أشياء كثيرة جدا، يعني برضو مش واضح هي من أنهي مكان كانت موجودة. هل الناسخ ذكر تاريخ النسخ بتاعها في نهاية النسخة عشان نعرف تاريخها؟ يعني إيه ما هي المحددات أو العامة؟
No, in this case, I simply refer you to the publication that is listed on top there by Zulfikar Hirji, because he in that article he does a comparison between three manuscript copies that all originate from the northern part of the East African coast. So he's both looking at comparisons in terms of its production, its custodial history, but also to some extent about the style of the script and of the illumination. So from the point of view of Quranic production in East Africa, actually these three are some of the three major known copies produced in East Africa itself that are held in collections, not in private ownership. Like I said, I am in absolutely no position myself to... Bonjour.
Bonjour, vous avez très bien, merci pour votre présentation, c'est très amusante, vraiment richesse de beaucoup d'informations. je veux demander quelque chose. Vous n'avez pas dire sur la préservation et la conservation de ces genres de manuscrits, parce qu'il y a, pour la première page, nous avons vu maintenant, nous avons parlé sur la décoration et les genres de l'écriture, mais pour la préservation et la conservation de cette page ou ces manuscrits, comment vous pouvez nous parler sur cette discussion-là? Et le genre de papier et la fabrication de papier, le genre de ces manuscrits dans ce siècle.
Thank you so much for that question, because that I think is the core question here. All of the manuscripts that are in EIP 466, which are in the Riyadh Mosque, all of the manuscripts and prints that are in the Malamidris collection and in similar collections throughout East Africa, they are not conserved at all. They are simply kept in the teaching facilities of the mosque, which makes them secure to a certain level, but of course makes them also very open to environmental degradation, which is the main problem in a very humid environment. Maybe I should, if I can improvise a bit here and find another presentation, I can show you some cases of what it really looks like. I have showed you, let me see. Whereas the ones that are in, let's say in the Zanzibar National Archives, you already commented on how it's being shielded with tissue paper between the pages, and it is also kept in more stable environmental conditions, which of course helps a lot. The same is true for material held by the Zanzibar National Archives. The material that is really endangered is, for example, the Arabic and Ajami language material that is today in northern Mozambique, due to the ongoing conflict both within and beyond mosques and teaching institutions, which is really highly problematic. It is also, of course, a problem as elsewhere that the state institutions that hold these archives do not always have sufficient funding to keep them in a good way, which yes, there are projects running. There are projects running all the time in Zanzibar, especially the Sultanate of Oman has been very active in doing conservation programs and digitizing programs. I have to say, frankly, I'm always a bit sort of, when we do this digitizing projects, we digitize a lot. We take all these photos, upload them to the Endangered Archives Program website or other websites. And then we know, of course, that the physical objects are left almost without any conservation whatsoever. Let me try to share with you just a sample, since you asked, because it's a very, very pertinent question. Let me see, share screen. Just gonna find the right image here. Do you see a shared screen now, or? No, you don't. Let me see. Share screen.
Non,
This
pas
one.
encore.
Non,
Oui.
mais maintenant ça marche, oui. You see this?
Oui, je le vois.
Oui, c'est comme, this is the state of affairs. We did try to digitize as much as we could, but many of the manuscripts were in this state, meaning that you either could not open them or it is impossible or you would damage them if you do a full digitizing. You would damage them even further. And this, I think, is the main problem. And there is no particular project or funding, neither in the teaching institutions themselves, nor in the mosques themselves, nor with the custodians themselves to conduct conservation. In the case of Kenya, the Kenya National Archive, the National Museums of Kenya has run several awareness programs and also competence programs to conduct on-site conservation in the simplest form, you know, to build boxes and provide cupboards that can actually be closed just to save from dust. In some cases also new shelves, because the wooden shelves are the main sources of the little bugs that infect these manuscripts. I believe this is, or I know that this is an experience that many who work with manuscripts basically all over the world deal with. And since you raised the question, I would be very happy and glad to have a discussion here about what would be the best ways to proceed. I know that some of you have experiences from Timbuktu and or West Africa and the large-scale programs there. The problem in East Africa is almost the opposite, that it's hard to raise money because it's small. It is simply not big enough to attract sort of large-scale interest or funding. Because Riyadh, you are talking about 145 manuscripts, and the Zanzibar National Archives maybe 180. So you're all the time on that level, meaning that it's quite difficult to attract the sort of large-scale funding programs, simply because the scale is small. The only way I could think of is to create a more sort of regional program, and I know that the Endangered Archives program is nowadays trying to set up these regional hubs in Africa, one east and one west. I don't know exactly how it will end out, but that could be a sort of step in the right direction. So please, all your comments and opinions are here very welcome.
Hi, English speaker here.
Yeah.
I definitely think that your idea of regional hubs of competencies, or what we refer to in South Africa as centers of excellence, that could then take on the work of working with the smaller, more localized institutions and collections. And obviously there's going to be quite a need for outreach and managing the personal and social aspects of that, and building trust with regards to the care of manuscripts. It would need to probably be, at least for a while, surrendered to a facility where more intense work could be. But certainly there is, being a sort of a tropical, semi-tropical area with the insect activity that they have, this kind of insect degradation will absolutely be an issue going forward, and definitely something does need to be done.
Yeah, yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that very much, and I know that you have a lot of experience from.
Yes, I'm up for helping out in any way.
Yes, and of course the Timbuktu projects were so different in the sense that they were on a whole different scale.
Yes, that was very much a government-to-government relationship, and then we worked through the local government institution, the Ahmed Baba Center, but there was very early on a recognition of the need to reach out to the community and the private libraries. So we had a session on basic care that sort of took people through the ideas of the surface cleaning, the protective enclosures, all of that kind of thing. And we were looking at expanding that in the next sort of iteration of the project. However, the big coup in Mali sort of knocked that sideways. Yeah, so there's absolutely, definitely scope for that kind of work and that kind of relationship.
No, I agree with that, and I think it is. We had a workshop in Zanzibar back in 2019 where we had both the Zanzibar authorities and also the National Museum of Kenya. This is also across nation states, right? Which complicates the matter further. Yes. That you have national institutions with their own agendas and their own.
Absolutely.
Yeah, their own programs, their own funding patterns, and so on, and also their own donor systems. So, which makes it even more complicated. But again, it's in and of itself, each individual collection like this one isn't really that costly if to conduct exactly this type of minimum conservation. Absolutely. And minimum interventions. I've made that budget so many times, and it isn't really that much, which presents almost as a kind of problem.
Yes,
because the big donors are not interested, and
it's small potatoes, and
yes.
Sometimes because digital is the fashion at the moment, that's where everybody's attention is, that's where the status and the hierarchy is in terms of institutions being able to sort of boast about their achievements, and sadly the actual grubby original document gets left by the wayside, which is very sad. I think we must learn to better advocate for this aspect of the collection and make the stories, their stories, compelling, which I think in terms where your analysis and building a sort of a picture of where these objects come from and how they were made and how they relate to social and political things is quite critical.
Thank you for that. It is a complicated picture in many senses. I mean, in many ways, I very much agree that digital is the way, because it is extremely democratic. It makes a set of heritage readily available to anyone with a smartphone, and I know that it is being used very much exactly in that way, but that doesn't help very much for the physical objects that are left in this state, as you see here.
No, for sure.
Is there any other input? I am really glad to have this conversation, actually. I have some questions in the chat. Maybe we can take that. If there are no other comments on the topic of conservation. I think it is also fair to say that there is also cases when there is or this, now I'm speaking more about experience in Mozambique, that there is a lack of trust in government institutions, meaning that people are not very willing to part with heritage like this and deposit in archives, which also presents as a problem, of course. I'm going to read a little bit from the questions. In your opinion, how are educational manuscripts different from others, and how to evaluate their importance from a codicological point of view? Yeah, that is a very good question, and I think perhaps exactly the question I was pondering over this this notebook manuscript that we saw of the jinn invocations, because it makes it exactly difficult to judge what is an educational manuscript. Was it written to be used, to be actually recited, or was it used to be passed on or transmitted in the sort of knowledge transmission tradition? Of course, we cannot know, and that's actually why I raised exactly the question of can the manuscript itself give us any hint in this regard? Can we say something in terms of that it presents in a pedagogical way, for example, or that care is taken to make the script itself clear and readable? I think I would make the argument. I would make this argument regarding the jinn invocation text, that if it was only for usage, the practitioner would have written it more. I wouldn't say sloppily exactly, but less defined. But I'm not sure. I am really not sure. So if I'm going to throw the question back, it would be more, how do we actually differentiate between what is educational and what is direct usage? In some cases, it's obvious. A person has written down Dalail al-Kharat or something for his or her own usage. And it's sometimes even stated. And to carry it around, to recite it on relevant occasions. In other cases, it's really not that clear. Did that answer your question? Anyone whoever raised the question? I know I answered the question with a question. Sorry for that. Did it answer your question? I hope so. If not, please repeat it if it didn't. Regarding articles and books on manuscripts as sources of social history, yeah, good question. Maybe the references I'm going to give you are a little bit out of scope, because since I work mostly with East Africa, my go-to comparative reading is very often Indonesia, in fact. Simply because you do see very many of the same texts, and I tend less to refer to the West African corpus, which is on me more than anyone else. But there is a really good book out just now by Ismail Al-Attas, which is entitled "What is Islamic Authority?" I think it's 2020 or 2021, where he goes to some of the textual traditions, both in manuscript and print, and looks, for example, at how individual teachers established their authority on the basis of the text itself, the object of the book, or the library as such. That's one recent example I can think about. But as a methodological tool, there are also some surveys in Indonesia on where they describe libraries of the Quranic schools or the pesantren of Indonesia with a slightly more sort of developed methodology of what are we looking for. Who are the students, for example? What are their social backgrounds? Can we know something about their educational history, and can we follow their lives? How did the qualification from a Quranic school take the person further, perhaps also into secular education systems later on? So perhaps my answer is not particularly useful for the Islamic Manuscripts in Africa conference, since I'm giving you references to Indonesia first and foremost. I know there's also studies on this from Egypt. Maybe I would, if you are keen to read further, I would also refer you to the works by Catherine Jaouen, or Jaouen. I'm not exactly sure of her pronunciation, which is on the manuscript to print transition and how it cohabited for a long time in libraries in Egypt. And again, the sort of social aspects of this, how librarians worked with it, how readers accessed it, and who these readers were, and how, of course, also how this impacted of the transition into modernism and so on. I can write her name here, maybe in the chat. There we go. And these are both 2020 books, so they are very recent. Is there any other comment or question that we can raise before we leave each other for today? I'm really sorry we didn't meet in person. I was a bit hesitant about how a workshop would work when we sit each beyond in front of our screens. But I hope at least we have been able to work through.
كاترين، ممكن يعني أقول شيء قبل أن يعني ننهي هذه الورشة؟ شوفي، قضية التفريق ما بين المتن العلمي أو المخطوط التعليمي والمخطوط الذي كتب لغيره، هذا الأمر بيتوقف على دراسة ما يسمى بأنماط النسخ أنماط النسخ في يعني أنماط النسخ في التراث العربي. يعني هل هو عن طريق عملية الإملاء؟ هل هو عن طريق مثلا عملية التأليف، كتابة المؤلف متنه بيده، عن طريق بعض التلاميذ الذين كانوا يتلقون عن المعلم؟ هذا أمر مهم جدا جدا، لأن من خلاله نستطيع أن نفرق بين النصوص الأصيلة والنصوص التعليمية والنصوص المنسوخة من النصوص الأخرى. وهذه الأمور مهمة جدا في هذا الأمر. مثلا إذا وجدت الناسخ، تعرفين الناسخ طبعا يتحدث في بداية النسخة عن قال مش عارف العالم العلامة الحبر الفهامة فلان فلان فلان، هذا من قول الناسخ، وهو نسخ هذه النسخة من نسخة المؤلف. أما إذا بدأ المؤلف قوله قال الفقير إلى الله سبحانه وتعالى، هذه ربما تكون من صنع المؤلف ذاته. إذا وجدنا في النسخة حدثنا فلان عن فلان عن فلان كذا وأنبأني كذا، هذه غالبا ما تكون بعض النسخ التعليمية. فهناك يعني أسس معينة في أنماط النسخ. هذه الأسس ينبغي الاعتماد عليها في التفريق ما بين أنواع المخطوطات المختلفة. شكرا.
Thank you very much for that. I agree with you, and of course this is what we are trying to do. Sometimes you can also make that differentiation quite clearly just from the states or from the collection where the manuscript is found. If it is in a teaching institution, you can assume that it has been used in an educational context. But again, there are many instances where I'm really unsure of why, for what purposes this particular manuscript was made. Perhaps even more so when you are in the 20th century, because then you see less of these introductions, let's say why this is copied or for whom or for what usage. It's simply written down in a notebook, like I showed you, without any explanation whatsoever. I see the last question now is on the aspects of making manuscripts in the East African region. I'm sorry for getting this question again, because the same one came up on Sunday on which paper, how paper got there. This is something that really should be studied much more. There are a few handful of small studies from the Zanzibar National Archives. That is the only ones I know. There is, again, no regional overview. But I am being reminded now that we have 2 minutes left of our session, and I would like to use those 2 minutes to thank you all for your participation, and again thank the ASMIA conference for facilitating in such an excellent way. Thank you to Dalia, thank you to the team. Thank you to the interpreters again for always being with us. I look forward to see you one day all again in person, hopefully. Thank you so much.